Friends, if you want to watch the super hit movie Oppenheimer, 2023, in English, then you must like this video. And if you are visiting our channel for the very first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, so you never miss out on exciting movie updates and interesting facts. Friends, in today's video, we are going to talk about one of the biggest and most talked about films of recent years, a film that took the world by storm with its gripping story, powerful characters, and breathtaking filmmaking. Yes, the movie we are going to dive into today is Oppenheimer. In this video, we will explore everything about Oppenheimer in full detail. What is this movie about? Where can you watch it? Which OTT platform is currently streaming this film? And on which satellite channel you might catch it soon? We will cover it all. I will take you through the entire journey of this movie, starting from the early planning and pre-production stages, moving on to how the filming took place, and how it all came together during post-production to create this cinematic masterpiece. We will also discuss the movie's massive budget, how much it earned at the box office, and whether it lived up to expectations. But that's not all. In today's video, I will also tell you the full story of Oppenheimer, what makes this story so unique and why it has captured the attention of audiences worldwide. I will give you a quick review and share what I personally found interesting about the film's storyline, pace, and emotional depth. We will also break down the performances of the actors in this film, who played which character, how well they performed, and what made their acting stand out. And yes, friends, we will talk about some amazing and lesser-known facts about this film, the challenges the team faced during the shoot, and what went on behind the scenes that you probably don't know. From the technical aspects like cinematography and sound design to the hauntingly beautiful music score that adds life to the film, we will cover every angle in this video. So friends, if you are truly a fan of movies that leave an impact, that make you think, and that stay with you long after you leave the cinema, then you must watch this video till the end, because we are going to explore Oppenheimer in a way that you've never heard before. So without wasting any more time, let's start the video and step into the fascinating world of Oppenheimer. The story of Oppenheimer is not a simple, straight journey from beginning to end. It is a rich, complex narrative that twists, turns, jumps in time, and plays with perspective in a way that makes the audience feel like they are piecing together a grand, unfinished puzzle. It's a story that doesn't politely wait for you to catch up. It demands your attention, pulling you back and forth between Oppenheimer's early days, his shining moments of triumph, and his darkest, most haunting hours. It's a narrative that dances between past and present, layering every scene with tension, regret, and the enormous pressure of living with the consequences of one's own genius. The movie opens by immediately introducing us to a man whose mind is like a storm, full of sparks of brilliant ideas and unsettling visions. We see the young Robert Oppenheimer, restless, curious, and already obsessed with the hidden forces of the universe. From the start, the film shows us that he is not just another scientist, he is someone destined to shape history, though not in the way anyone could have fully predicted. Rather than following a slow, step-by-step timeline, the story jumps around, offering flashbacks to his student days, rapid shifts to key moments of scientific discovery, and sudden leaps into the intense security hearings that would later try to destroy his reputation. These hearings form the backbone of the narrative, constantly pulling us back to a future where Oppenheimer must defend not just his career, but his very identity. The film plays with the contrast between color and black and white sequences to keep us on edge, signaling different points of view. Some scenes reflect Oppenheimer's internal experiences and emotions, while others show us how history, the government, and his enemies see him. This clever structure keeps the audience actively engaged, making us question who truly controls the story, Oppenheimer himself or the people judging him. A major turning point in the story is when Oppenheimer is approached to lead the Manhattan Project, a secret mission to develop the atomic bomb before Nazi Germany can. This decision changes everything. Suddenly, the man who dreamed of unlocking the secrets of the universe finds himself in charge of building a weapon powerful enough to end it. The story then shifts to Los Alamos, where Oppenheimer gathers the greatest scientific minds to work under impossible pressure, tight deadlines, and the shadow of World War II. The narrative here is thick with urgency and competition, but it's never just about the science. The film constantly reminds us of the emotional weight pressing on Oppenheimer. His complex relationships, his uneasy marriage, his guilt over past affairs, his growing political ties, and his quiet but increasing fear about the bomb's ultimate use. The movie brings us to the Trinity Test, one of the most unforgettable parts of the story. Everything leads to this moment, and the build-up is intense. Scientists and soldiers are holding their breath, the future of the world literally hanging in the balance. When the bomb explodes for the first time, the film doesn't just show us fire and power, it plunges us into Oppenheimer's shattered state of mind. In that single moment, he realizes he has succeeded and failed all at once. He has won the race, but he has also released a terrifying force that will haunt him forever. It is not a victory march. It is a silent, dreadful understanding that the world will never be the same. But the story doesn't let him rest after the explosion. It throws us forward into the brutal security hearings where Oppenheimer is dragged through endless questioning, betrayal, and public humiliation. These hearings are not simply legal sessions. They are emotional battlegrounds where Oppenheimer is forced to relive his past, answer for his choices, and watch his former friends turn against him. The film carefully jumps between timelines here, showing how each decision, each friendship, and each moment of hesitation shaped his downfall. We see the manipulation, the political games, and the deeply personal attacks that come at him from all sides. What makes the story even more gripping is the way it balances the large-scale global impact of the atomic bomb with the deeply personal cost to Oppenheimer himself. It's not just a history lesson. It's a story about a man torn between ambition and responsibility, between science and morality. The movie constantly shifts between grand, world-changing events and intimate, painful moments in Oppenheimer's life, conversations with his wife, moments of self-doubt, silent reflections on what he has done. The conflicts in the story are never simple. Oppenheimer is not just fighting enemies in court. He is wrestling with his own conscience. He is praised as a hero by some, accused as a traitor by others, but above all, he is haunted by the knowledge that he opened a door that can never be closed. The film plays with this inner conflict beautifully, layering the story with moral questions that keep echoing through every scene. The emotional impact is enormous. You feel the tension not just in the race to build the bomb, but in Oppenheimer's quiet moments of despair, in his haunted stares, in the way his relationships slowly collapse under the weight of his work. The story never feels like a straight march from beginning to end. It moves in waves, pulling you in and out of different moments, building a complex, emotional portrait of a man who changed the world but lost himself along the way. Every turning point in the story, from the first decision to join the Manhattan Project, to the triumphant but terrifying Trinity Test, to the vicious security hearings, adds another layer to Oppenheimer's journey. The narrative keeps switching gears, forcing the audience to question what it means to be a hero, what it means to carry guilt, and whether some inventions are too powerful for anyone to control. The story is built like a storm, swirling, unpredictable, and impossible to escape. It challenges the audience to keep up, to think deeply, and to sit with the uncomfortable weight of what Oppenheimer's story really means. The character development in Oppenheimer is one of the most fascinating parts of the film, because it doesn't offer simple growth or easy answers. Instead, it gives us a world full of people who are complicated, deeply human, and constantly shifting under the pressure of history. These characters are layered, unpredictable, and at times, even contradictory, which makes their journeys feel incredibly real and gripping. At the center of everything is Robert Oppenheimer himself, and his transformation is unlike most typical movie protagonists. He begins as a man completely consumed by his love for science and his ambition to make groundbreaking discoveries. In the early parts of his life, Oppenheimer is fiercely curious, driven by a desire to explore the unknown and push the limits of what is possible. But he is not a perfect genius. The film shows his flaws from the start. He is arrogant, socially awkward, emotionally distant, and sometimes reckless in both his professional decisions and his personal life. What makes his character so fascinating is that he is always walking a thin line between brilliance and disaster, both in the laboratory and in his own relationships. As Oppenheimer moves from student to leader of the Manhattan Project, his role changes dramatically. Suddenly, he is not just a scientist working on abstract theories. He is the man responsible for creating the most dangerous weapon in human history. This enormous responsibility begins to weigh on him, shaping his character in ways he never expected. He is no longer chasing knowledge for its own sake. Now every calculation, every decision, every successful experiment carries the potential to wipe out entire cities. His growth is not a smooth heroic climb. It is a painful, jagged journey filled with self-doubt, fear, and guilt. His eyes grow heavier, his posture changes, and his confidence starts to crack as the story progresses. His internal battle between scientific ambition and moral responsibility becomes the heart of his character arc. One of the most intense relationships in the film is between Oppenheimer and General Leslie Groves. Their dynamic is complex and constantly evolving. At first, Groves sees Oppenheimer as a risky but necessary choice, a brilliant scientist who can get the job done, but who comes with personal baggage and political ties that could cause problems. As they work together, they develop a mutual respect, but their relationship is always on edge. Groves is a man of discipline and military efficiency, while Oppenheimer is driven by curiosity and creativity, often ignoring rules and pushing against boundaries. Their clashes are not just about science. They are about how much freedom a man like Oppenheimer can have when working on something that could change the course of history. Despite their differences, Groves grows to trust him, though that trust is never without concern. The push and pull between them reveals how two very different worlds, science and military power, had to collide to make the atomic bomb a reality. The film also gives careful attention to Oppenheimer's personal life, especially his complicated relationships with two women, his wife, Kitty Oppenheimer, and his former lover, Jean Tatlock. Kitty is not a quiet, background character. She is fiery, sharp, and often just as emotionally volatile as Oppenheimer himself. Their marriage is filled with passion, but also with tension and betrayal. Kitty struggles to find her place in Oppenheimer's world. She feels neglected, yet fiercely protective of him. As Oppenheimer becomes more isolated, Kitty steps forward to defend him, particularly during the brutal security hearings. Her strength and refusal to crumble in the face of public attack reveal layers of her character that might not seem obvious at first glance. She is not there simply to support Oppenheimer. She fights for her own survival and for the legacy of her family. Jean Tatlock's relationship with Oppenheimer is another essential thread in his character's emotional journey. She is a free spirit, deeply intelligent, and politically outspoken, but she is also fragile and battling her own demons. Her influence on Oppenheimer is undeniable, and even after their relationship ends, her memory continues to haunt him. Jean represents a part of Oppenheimer's life that he can never fully escape, a mixture of guilt, loss, and emotional complexity that follows him throughout the film. Her story isn't just a subplot. It is a crucial part of understanding Oppenheimer's inner world. The other scientists who work alongside Oppenheimer at Los Alamos are not just faceless team members. They each carry their own hopes, fears, and philosophies about the work they are doing. Some are enthusiastic, some are terrified, and some are simply doing what they are told, but they all contribute to the chaotic and pressurized atmosphere of the Manhattan Project. The film gives us glimpses of their debates, their ethical questions, and their growing concern over what the bomb will actually be used for. These supporting characters help shape Oppenheimer's environment and push him to confront questions he can no longer avoid. One of the most quietly powerful relationships in the film is the one between Oppenheimer and Albert Einstein. Einstein appears in just a few key moments, but his presence carries enormous weight. He serves almost as a ghostly reminder of the scientific responsibility that stretches far beyond calculations and experiments. His quiet conversations with Oppenheimer are filled with unspoken tension and wisdom. Einstein seems to understand the burden that Oppenheimer is about to carry long before Oppenheimer fully realizes it himself. These scenes are not grand speeches. They are small, reflective moments that stick with Oppenheimer and with the audience. Lewis Strauss, one of the film's most significant antagonistic forces, adds another layer of tension. His character is driven by a mix of ambition, pride, and political strategy. At first, he seems like an ally, but his insecurities and grudges begin to surface, especially when he feels overshadowed by Oppenheimer's fame and influence. Strauss's transformation into one of Oppenheimer's chief opponents is not sudden. It is a slow, methodical build that plays out beautifully throughout the story. His role in the security hearings shows how personal vendettas can hide behind the mask of national security, and how political power can be used to dismantle someone's legacy. The beauty of the film's character development is that no one is painted in simple colors. Everyone has a mix of light and dark, strength and weakness, loyalty and betrayal. Oppenheimer's story is not just about the bomb. It is about the relationships that shaped him, the people who challenged him, the lovers who wounded him, and the enemies who tried to destroy him. His growth is not the kind that offers comfort. It is the kind that leaves him broken, haunted, and painfully aware of the price of his own brilliance. The people around him, whether they stand with him or against him, are equally layered with their own arcs, motivations, and personal stakes. They are not there to serve Oppenheimer's story. They are living, breathing characters whose lives are also reshaped by the events unfolding around them. This web of characters makes the story feel alive, unpredictable, and profoundly human. The brilliance of the performances in Oppenheimer isn't just about how talented the actors are. It's about how deeply they embody the inner lives of these historical figures, and how completely they transport the audience into Oppenheimer's conflicted world. Each performance feels like a carefully layered study of human complexity, where every line, glance, pause, and breath carries meaning. Starting with Cillian Murphy, his performance is a masterclass in controlled intensity and emotional subtlety. Murphy carries the entire film on his shoulders, and what's extraordinary is how he does it not with grand gestures but with restraint. He brings to life a man who is constantly thinking, calculating, and quietly crumbling under the weight of his own achievements. His gaunt frame, his haunted eyes, and his jittery energy perfectly convey a mind racing faster than his ability to cope with the consequences. Murphy allows the audience to feel Oppenheimer's internal struggle, not through dramatic breakdowns, but through the slow erosion of his spirit. Even when Oppenheimer is standing at the peak of his scientific success, there's a visible sadness and fear inside him that Murphy carefully unveils layer by layer. When Oppenheimer realizes the true destructive power of what he's created, Murphy plays it with a kind of hollowed-out numbness that speaks volumes. He doesn't have to scream to show devastation. His quiet horror is far more powerful. Emily Blunt's performance as Kitty Oppenheimer becomes one of the most emotionally gripping elements of the film. Blunt plays Kitty as fiercely intelligent and emotionally volatile, refusing to be boxed into the role of the loyal wife waiting at home. She captures Kitty's frustration, her loneliness, and her own battles with addiction and societal expectations. Kitty is often sidelined by Oppenheimer's obsession with his work, and Blunt makes us feel every ounce of that emotional neglect. Her most unforgettable moment comes during the brutal security hearing when she refuses to be intimidated. She burns through the scene with laser-sharp defiance, standing firm as others try to tear her husband apart. Blunt plays Kitty with a perfect blend of vulnerability and fire. She is wounded, but she will not break. That complexity makes Kitty more than just a background character. She is a fully realized force within the film, a woman struggling to hold on to herself as her husband's world spins out of control. Robert Downey Jr. delivers one of his most transformative performances as Louis Strauss. Known for his charisma and quick wit, Downey Jr. completely strips that away here, replacing it with quiet, seething resentment and political calculation. Strauss is not a villain in the cartoonish sense. He is a man driven by his own insecurities, his bruised ego, and his desperate need for recognition. Downey Jr. plays him as patient, methodical, and emotionally cold, which makes his betrayal of Oppenheimer feel all the more cutting. It's in the small moments where his performance shines, the controlled tone of his voice when he feels slighted, the forced smiles that barely hide his bitterness, the careful pacing of his words during the hearings. He builds Strauss into a character who doesn't need to lash out because his power comes from subtle manipulation and quiet revenge. Downey Jr. completely vanishes into the role, making you almost forget the actor and see only the character, which is a testament to his skill. Florence Pugh, despite limited screen time, leaves a haunting impact as Jean Tatlock. Her chemistry with Murphy is intense and undeniable, and she brings to Jean a kind of emotional rawness that feels dangerous and magnetic. Pugh plays Jean as a woman who is intellectually fearless but emotionally fragile. She is Oppenheimer's escape, but she is also a source of profound guilt and unresolved grief. Pugh's portrayal doesn't just make Jean a love interest. She becomes a symbol of Oppenheimer's inability to control all aspects of his life. Their moments together are charged with passion, but also shadowed by inevitable tragedy. Pugh's ability to make a lasting impression in such a short time speaks to her remarkable screen presence. Matt Damon's performance as General Leslie Groves adds both weight and balance to the story. Damon plays Groves with a mix of stern authority and surprising patience. He's the military hammer brought in to get the job done, but he also understands the need to manage brilliant, difficult people like Oppenheimer. Damon walks a fine line. He must command respect but also win trust, especially in the high-stakes environment of the Manhattan Project. Damon's Groves doesn't always agree with Oppenheimer, but there's an undeniable respect between the two, and Damon's grounded performance allows that complex relationship to breathe. He brings just enough humor and humanity to Groves to keep him from becoming a one-dimensional authority figure. The supporting cast is stacked with unforgettable performances that elevate the entire film. Benny Safdie as Edward Teller is intense and intellectually ruthless. Safdie portrays Teller as a man who sees the hydrogen bomb as the next frontier, fully believing that science must march forward, no matter the cost. His quiet disagreements with Oppenheimer provide some of the most fascinating ideological clashes in the film. Jason Clarke as Roger Robb, the prosecutor who tears into Oppenheimer during the security hearings, is chilling. Clarke delivers his lines with cold, cutting precision, stripping Oppenheimer's defenses away one piece at a time. His performance is like a slow, relentless attack, and it keeps the audience on edge throughout the hearing scenes. Even actors with smaller roles bring immense weight. Rami Malek, in a brief but critical moment, delivers a performance that shifts the entire narrative. He builds tension with just a few carefully measured lines, showing how even a supporting character can tip the scales in a story filled with power struggles. Kenneth Branagh as Niels Bohr, Gary Oldman as President Truman, and Tom Conti as Albert Einstein all bring gravitas and depth to their limited screen time. Each appearance feels significant, and each actor fully inhabits their role without ever feeling like a cameo for the sake of star power. The ensemble works in perfect harmony, with each actor enhancing the emotional realism of the story. There are no weak links. Every performance feels lived in, fully embodied, and emotionally sincere. The film doesn't rely on flashy monologues to make its points. It relies on the quiet exhaustion in Oppenheimer's face, the sharp edge in Kitty's voice, the carefully concealed contempt in Strauss's gaze, and the haunted silence that follows moments of great achievement and even greater regret. The actors bring these silences to life, making them as powerful as the spoken word. The strength of Oppenheimer's performances is that they make the characters feel profoundly human, flawed, contradictory, brilliant, and broken. They make you believe in the personal stakes behind the historical events. They make you care about not just the bomb, but the people who built it, the people who tried to stop it, and the people who lived with its consequences. The cast doesn't just tell the story. They embody it, making it feel immediate, intimate, and unforgettable. Christopher Nolan's direction in Oppenheimer is not just a guiding hand. It's the engine that drives the entire experience. Nolan doesn't approach this as a standard historical biopic or a scientific drama. Instead, he turns it into something much more visceral, psychological, and relentless. His fingerprints are on every frame, every sound, every structural decision, and the result is a film that feels like it's not just unfolding in front of you. It's happening to you. Nolan immediately establishes a tone that is sharp, uneasy, and constantly moving. He doesn't hold back. The story doesn't gently introduce you to the world of theoretical physics, or carefully lead you through a step-by-step timeline of events. From the start, Nolan plunges you into Oppenheimer's chaotic mind, bombarding the audience with rapid-fire conversations, shifting locations, and dense intellectual exchanges. It's not a comfortable pace. It's meant to feel overwhelming because that's exactly how it felt for Oppenheimer himself. A man trying to grasp concepts that would forever reshape the fate of the world, while simultaneously juggling egos, politics, and his own moral uncertainty. Nolan's direction captures this whirlwind with surgical precision. The relentless pacing in the first half of the film feels like an unstoppable march toward destiny, mirroring the urgency of the arms race and Oppenheimer's own drive to push the boundaries of science. Nolan doesn't slow down to give the audience easy answers, because life didn't slow down for Oppenheimer. The decision to fracture the timeline and tell the story non-linearly is classic Nolan, but here it feels more emotionally connected than ever. He cuts between Oppenheimer's early academic life, the Los Alamos Project, and the post-war security hearings with such frequency that the boundaries of time begin to dissolve. Past, present, and future collide on screen, which perfectly reflects Oppenheimer's own psychological collapse. Nolan isn't just experimenting with structure for the sake of complexity. The fragmented narrative traps the audience inside Oppenheimer's guilt-ridden memory, where events don't unfold in a neat sequence but instead crash over him like waves, relentlessly, unpredictably, and with growing intensity. You never feel settled, and that's exactly the point. One of Nolan's most brilliant stylistic choices is his use of dual color palettes to distinguish between subjective and objective reality. The color sequences are shown through Oppenheimer's point of view, where emotions, imagination, and fear blur the lines of fact. In contrast, the black and white sequences step outside his mind and show the colder, more detached perspectives of other key players, especially Lewis Strauss. This duality is not just visual. Nolan's direction uses this contrast to explore the theme of perception versus truth. It forces the audience to question what they are seeing. Are we witnessing objective history? Or are we trapped inside the haunted memories of a man who cannot escape the weight of his choices? Nolan's command of shot composition is equally masterful. His use of close-ups, particularly on Cillian Murphy's face, creates an intimate yet claustrophobic atmosphere. The camera often lingers uncomfortably close, pulling the audience deep into Oppenheimer's emotional state. You can see every flicker of doubt, every moment of panic, every suppressed emotion etched into Murphy's sharp features. Nolan wants you to stare into this man's soul, and he doesn't let you look away. But then, in striking contrast, Nolan also pulls back to deliver breathtaking wide shots of desolate landscapes, massive construction sites, and the ominous calm of the New Mexico desert. These wide shots don't just provide visual relief. They emphasize the scale of what Oppenheimer and his team are about to unleash on the world. Perhaps one of Nolan's greatest achievements as a director in this film is his handling of the Trinity Test. Instead of turning this moment into a conventional action sequence with booming sound effects and visual spectacle, Nolan approaches it as a moment of almost unbearable suspense. He stretches the countdown to the point where time itself feels like it's breaking apart. The actual explosion is presented with such stunning restraint that it becomes almost surreal. The sound cuts out completely, leaving the audience in a suffocating silence as the mushroom cloud rises in terrifying beauty. It's a moment that is both magnificent and horrifying, and Nolan lets us sit in that silence for just long enough to understand the weight of what has just happened. His decision to delay the arrival of sound after the explosion is not just a technical trick. It's a psychological punch that forces the audience to process the impact on a deeper, more personal level. The rhythm of the film is another product of Nolan's meticulous direction. He crafts a first half that is kinetic, filled with urgency and intellectual momentum, but then deliberately shifts the pace in the second half. As Oppenheimer's life begins to collapse under the political pressures and moral reckonings, Nolan slows everything down, tightening the noose with cold, procedural precision. The courtroom and security hearing scenes are constructed like a psychological thriller, not a dry recounting of history. Nolan uses tension-building techniques, quick cuts, sharp glances, oppressive silences, to make these scenes feel as suspenseful as the lead-up to the Trinity Test. It's a brilliant choice because it shows that Oppenheimer's destruction didn't come from the atomic bomb. It came from the quiet, methodical dismantling of his reputation and his own sense of self. Another stroke of genius is how Nolan directs his massive ensemble cast. With so many major actors and historical figures on screen, it would have been easy to lose focus or fall into the trap of simply name-dropping important people. But Nolan balances these performances with precision. He ensures that even minor characters leave an impression, and that the film never strays too far from Oppenheimer's internal journey. Each scene is carefully calibrated to either push the story forward or deepen our understanding of the emotional stakes. Visually, Nolan injects moments of almost abstract beauty into the film. When Oppenheimer imagines the movement of atoms, the shimmering waves of energy, or the fiery collapse of stars, Nolan doesn't bombard the screen with complex visual effects. Instead, he chooses minimalistic, impressionistic imagery that feels poetic and haunting. These visuals serve as windows into Oppenheimer's obsessive mind and his dangerous fascination with the building blocks of the universe. The sound design, which Nolan expertly manipulates throughout the film, becomes a character in itself. He drowns out conversations with roaring noise to illustrate moments of internal panic, then cuts sound completely to isolate key emotional beats. He makes silence louder than any explosion. The score by Ludwig Göransson blends seamlessly with Nolan's direction, creating an atmosphere that feels suffocating, dissonant, and sometimes painfully intense. The music pulses beneath the surface of nearly every scene, heightening the sense that disaster is always just seconds away. What makes Nolan's direction truly remarkable is that he never loses sight of the emotional core. It would have been easy to get lost in the scientific jargon, the historical recreation, or the visual spectacle, but Nolan stays firmly anchored in Oppenheimer's human story. The cinematography in Oppenheimer is an immersive, relentless visual experience that does far more than simply record events. It actively shapes the emotional journey, the psychological tension, and the philosophical weight of the story. Hoyt van Hoytema, Christopher Nolan's longtime collaborator, crafts a visual language that is simultaneously intimate and vast, brutal and beautiful, simple in its realism yet layered with symbolic depth. Every technical choice, the angles, the lighting, the color contrast, the movement of the camera, is infused with meaning, meticulously designed to keep the audience trapped inside Oppenheimer's fractured world. One of the most fascinating aspects of the cinematography is how it constantly shifts perspective to reflect Oppenheimer's inner state. Early in the film, when Oppenheimer is a young, ambitious scientist, the camera moves with fluidity and curiosity. It glides through lecture halls, dormitories, and laboratories, capturing the rush of intellectual discovery with sweeping motions and wide compositions that feel almost liberating. The lighting during these moments is often soft and natural, with warm hues that evoke the excitement of youthful ambition. The framing allows Oppenheimer to occupy the center of these expansive spaces, visually highlighting his growing importance in the scientific community. These early visuals are filled with possibility, but that freedom is slowly stripped away as the story progresses. As Oppenheimer becomes entangled in the Manhattan Project, and the moral consequences of his work begin to weigh on him, the cinematography tightens. The camera starts to close in on him, shrinking the frame, using tighter angles that reduce the breathing space around him. Where he once stood confidently in large open areas, he is now often boxed into small rooms, framed by walls, windows, doorways, and crowds that seem to press in on him. It's as if the physical world is starting to collapse around him, mirroring the collapse of his psychological defenses. This subtle but powerful shift in framing visually communicates Oppenheimer's growing isolation and emotional suffocation. The color palette evolves alongside the narrative. Nolan and Van Hoytema use two distinct styles, vivid color and stark black and white, not simply as a storytelling device but as a tool for psychological separation. The color sequences are filtered through Oppenheimer's subjective lens, rich with emotional texture, and often tinged with a subtle vibrancy that underscores his passion, his fear, and his spiraling guilt. The black and white sequences, by contrast, represent the cold, external world, the bureaucratic hearings, the political chess games, the judgment from others who see Oppenheimer not as a man, but as a symbol or a liability. These scenes are shot with sharp contrasts and almost clinical precision, stripping away the layers of Oppenheimer's humanity and reducing him to facts, reports, and testimony. The switch between these styles isn't just a visual choice, it's a psychological shift, a way of showing the audience when we are inside Oppenheimer's head, and when we are observing him from the cold distance of history. Lighting is used with extraordinary discipline throughout the film. During the sun-drenched scenes at Los Alamos, the light is harsh, almost unforgiving, casting hard shadows that create sharp visual contrasts. The desert doesn't offer the kind of golden warmth you might expect. It offers exposure, scrutiny, and a blinding clarity that leaves nowhere to hide. Indoors, the lighting often becomes oppressive. There are moments where faces are half swallowed by darkness, where overhead lights burn like interrogators' lamps, where the cold fluorescent glow of institutional spaces drains all color and life from the frame. These lighting choices are not just aesthetic. They create a sustained mood of pressure, paranoia, and entrapment. The Trinity Test sequence is where the cinematography reaches one of its most breathtaking and unforgettable peaks. Nolan and Van Hoytema make the extraordinary decision to capture the most pivotal moment, the detonation of the first atomic bomb, with an eerie patience and almost reverent stillness. The camera does not race or shake. Instead, it lingers, watching as cables are secured, as switches are flipped, as the desert waits in suffocating silence. The cinematography stretches time here, amplifying every detail. The flicker of flame, the tightening of safety goggles, the tense glances exchanged between scientists. When the bomb finally explodes, the cinematography delivers an image of terrifying beauty. The frame fills with a rolling fireball, and the audience is given a front-row seat to humanity's most devastating creation. But the camera does not immediately overwhelm with sound. It holds in silence, forcing the audience to process the image without distraction. The clarity of the explosion, captured in perfect detail, is both magnificent and horrifying. Nolan and Van Hoytema make sure the visual impact of the explosion lingers in the viewer's mind, unsoftened, unforgettable. What's especially masterful is how Van Hoytema brings visual poetry into the harsh realism of the film. The sequences where Oppenheimer envisions atomic particles, shimmering waves of energy, or the fiery collapse of celestial bodies are not presented as flashy visual effects. They are presented as intimate, almost minimalist visions that slip into the narrative like fleeting thoughts. The cinematography carefully integrates these flashes of atomic imagination into the fabric of Oppenheimer's reality. They come quickly, sometimes just a second or two, but they pierce through the naturalistic scenes and remind us that Oppenheimer's mind is always elsewhere, always caught between the beauty of science and the horror of its consequences. The use of close-ups throughout the film is particularly intense. Hoytema frequently isolates Oppenheimer's face in the frame, capturing every twitch, every slight widening of the eyes, every moment where Oppenheimer is physically present but mentally spiraling. These extreme close-ups are often uncomfortably long, almost confrontational, forcing the audience to remain in Oppenheimer's emotional orbit. The camera does not flinch away from his anguish, his guilt, or his self-loathing. It holds steady, demanding that we look directly into the man who has just reshaped the fate of humanity. Even the way the ensemble cast is framed tells a story. In crowded rooms filled with military officers, scientists, and politicians, Oppenheimer is often visually separated. Either the focus softens the people around him, or the camera places him at the edge of the frame, alone in a sea of collaborators. These moments subtly reinforce the idea that while the Manhattan Project was a collective effort, the moral burden rests squarely on Oppenheimer's shoulders. The cinematography also leans heavily on symbolic imagery. Rippling water, waves of fire, and particles vibrating against dark backdrops appear throughout the film, each time layered with new emotional meaning. Early on, these images are accompanied by excitement and wonder. Later, the same visual motifs return, now suffused with dread and guilt. Van Hoytema uses these recurring symbols as visual echoes, haunting both Oppenheimer and the audience, never allowing either to forget the cataclysmic consequences of scientific ambition. The editing and pacing of Oppenheimer are not just tools to move the story forward. They are the heartbeat of the film, the very mechanism that traps the audience inside the overwhelming, chaotic, and morally suffocating world of J. Robert Oppenheimer. Christopher Nolan, together with editor Jennifer Lame, crafts a cinematic rhythm that deliberately plays with the audience's perception of time, emotion, and consequence. This isn't simply a story about history. It's a story about memory, obsession, guilt, and the unstoppable momentum of progress, and the editing is the engine that drives all of these forces at once. Right from the beginning, the film throws the viewer into a whirlwind pace. There's no soft introduction, no easy walk into Oppenheimer's life. Instead, the editing jolts from scene to scene, sometimes within seconds, building a storm of images, conversations, and scientific breakthroughs. These rapid cuts are not accidental. They mirror the speed at which Oppenheimer's mind operates. His life moves quickly, decisions come rapidly, and the world around him evolves at a pace that feels almost out of control. The editing style forces the audience to keep up, to chase the story, just as the characters themselves are chasing answers, solutions, and ultimately, power. In these opening sections, there is barely room to breathe, and that's exactly the point. It's not a film that holds your hand. It hurls you into Oppenheimer's spiraling intellectual journey. But what makes the editing of Oppenheimer so fascinating is not just its speed, but its ability to balance that speed with carefully calculated slowdowns. The film knows precisely when to stretch time. One of the best examples is the Trinity Test sequence, arguably one of the most anticipated moments in the entire film. Leading up to this event, the pacing is relentless. The editing cuts from technical preparations to tense political meetings to Oppenheimer's sleepless nights. The pulse of the film quickens, the stakes mount, and then, just when the tension becomes unbearable, the editing slams the brakes. Time dilates. The actual moment of the bomb's detonation unfolds with surgical slowness. The editing gives each frame weight, each second its own oppressive silence. It's as if the film itself is holding its breath along with the characters, forcing the audience to feel the gravity of what they've been racing toward. This manipulation of pacing is a masterstroke because it prevents the film from ever feeling flat or predictable. It keeps the audience off balance, unsure of when to expect the next rush or the next moment of suffocating stillness. The editing never lets you get comfortable, which perfectly aligns with the psychological torment that Oppenheimer experiences throughout the story. Even the moments that should feel like triumphs are paced in such a way that they carry an undercurrent of dread. The structure of the film is famously nonlinear, and the editing plays a vital role in ensuring this structure is not just understandable but deeply impactful. The story doesn't unfold in a straight line. Instead, it's like a tapestry woven from different timelines, memories, and perspectives. There are moments when past and present collide in rapid succession. One scene barely closing before another from a different time period demands attention. The editing doesn't spoon-feed the audience. It requires active participation, as the viewer is constantly piecing together how events, decisions, and betrayals echo across different eras of Oppenheimer's life. This complexity is heightened by the film's dual use of color and black and white sequences. The editing seamlessly transitions between the subjective experiences of Oppenheimer's memory, rendered in vivid color, and the more detached, objective courtroom and political inquests, presented in stark black and white. These shifts are not labeled or explained. They simply happen, trusting the audience to keep pace. The brilliance of the editing lies in how naturally these transitions flow. They never feel like jarring stylistic changes, but instead like necessary shifts in perspective that the story demands. The rhythm of the cuts pulls the audience from Oppenheimer's haunted recollections to the cold, brutal present where his legacy is being dismantled. And just as the past bleeds into the present for Oppenheimer, it does for the viewer too. The editing also does something extraordinary in the way it layers sound, image, and rhythm to heighten emotional stakes. During key conversations, particularly in the security hearing scenes, the editing is not content with simply bouncing between speakers. It often flashes back to earlier moments, cutting rapidly to visual memories, fragments of events that may or may not fully explain Oppenheimer's choices. These rapid, almost intrusive flashes give the scenes a fractured, almost panicked energy. The editing pulls memories into the present moment, just as Oppenheimer's past relentlessly invades his present reality. It's not just cross-cutting, it's psychological warfare on the viewer's sense of time. Even in scenes that should, on the surface, be simple, like a conversation between Oppenheimer and another scientist, or a political argument, the editing maintains a rhythmic tension. The cuts are tight, the reactions are immediate, and the sense of urgency never fully dissipates. There's an intentional discomfort built into the pacing. The film refuses to let the audience fully relax because Oppenheimer himself is never allowed to. His entire life is spent balancing on the edge of discovery and destruction, and the editing ensures we feel that pressure. When the film moves into its final act, where Oppenheimer faces public humiliation, personal betrayal, and the crushing weight of his own decisions, the pacing deliberately slows. The earlier whirlwind of rapid intellectual ascent gives way to a heavier, more suffocating rhythm. Scenes are allowed to stretch. Silences linger longer. The editing holds shots of Oppenheimer's face, letting the weight of guilt and regret settle into his expression. The earlier fast-paced sections feel like a distant memory. This shift is devastating because it emphasizes that Oppenheimer is no longer racing toward anything. He's trapped, pinned under the consequences of what he helped build. What makes this film's editing so extraordinary is its ability to guide the audience through this emotional and narrative roller coaster without losing clarity. The structure is complex, the pacing is varied, the visual shifts between color and black and white are constant, but none of it feels messy. It feels alive. The editing breathes with the story, contracting and expanding, speeding up and slowing down in perfect harmony with Oppenheimer's mental and emotional state. The pacing, in particular, is never about comfort. It's about building a relentless emotional tension that follows the viewer long after the film ends. There's no moment where the audience is allowed to coast, no scene that feels like filler. Even the quieter moments are loaded with tension because the editing constantly reminds us of what's at stake and how the past is always waiting to catch up. In Oppenheimer, editing and pacing are not background elements. They are the narrative's muscle and pulse. They control the tempo of discovery, the suffocation of guilt, and the chaos of memory. The film's rhythm is like a ticking clock, but instead of counting down to a single moment, it is counting toward an endless reckoning. The soundtrack and score of Oppenheimer are an extraordinary force that shape the film's entire emotional landscape. Ludwig Göransson doesn't simply compose music for this film. He constructs an auditory world that pulses through every frame, breathing life, tension, and sometimes crushing silence into Oppenheimer's story. The music is not background. It is not decoration. It is a vital, living part of the narrative that pulls you into Oppenheimer's headspace and refuses to let you out. Right from the opening moments, the score establishes itself as something urgent and alive. Göransson uses fast, almost panic string arrangements that create an immediate sense of unease, as if something is always about to explode. This isn't a calm build-up. The film throws us into a rhythm that feels like a heartbeat that's racing too fast, like a ticking clock that's gone off tempo. It's a brilliant musical parallel to Oppenheimer's mind. A mind that is too fast, too complex, too entangled in ideas that it can't fully control. The music constantly chases him, sometimes even seems to overwhelm him, almost like his own genius has a sound, and it's not a peaceful one. The musical structure is incredibly dynamic. One moment it's racing, layered with violins and electronic pulses that create this dizzying effect, and the next it plunges into haunting silence. The way Göransson uses silence is one of the most powerful tools in the film. Silence is never a rest here. It's a scream that's been muted. In the most pivotal scenes, especially the Trinity Test sequence, the score builds and builds with this thunderous, chaotic energy, and then when the bomb detonates, the sound drops out entirely. The silence that follows is deafening. It's shocking. It's uncomfortable. It forces the audience to feel the magnitude of that moment without the safety net of sound. The absence of music at that point doesn't relax you. It pins you to your seat and demands that you sit in the unbearable weight of what's just happened. Throughout the film, Göransson cleverly plays with musical motifs that subtly evolve as Oppenheimer's journey unfolds. These recurring musical themes are not sweet melodies. They're fractured, mathematical, and often sound like they're spiraling or colliding. Early in the story, these motifs pulse with curiosity and discovery, echoing the excitement of new scientific breakthroughs. But as the narrative darkens, these same musical patterns grow sharper, more discordant, almost as if the music itself is unraveling alongside Oppenheimer's sense of control. The score doesn't just track the passage of time. It mirrors Oppenheimer's psychological descent. The same sounds that once represented innovation now sound like regret and impending doom. The choice of instruments is fascinating throughout the film. The dominant use of the violin gives the music a sharp, cutting texture, but it's not always clean. It's often layered in a way that makes it sound like it's trembling, almost like it's on the verge of collapsing into chaos. The piano appears in subtle moments, often providing a cold, distant echo rather than a comforting warmth. Electronic elements are scattered throughout, weaving modern tension into a story rooted in the past. The combination creates a soundscape that feels both timeless and trapped. A perfect sonic reflection of Oppenheimer's story, which is about a man whose legacy will echo forever, but whose life feels inescapably caged. One of the most brilliant aspects of the score is how seamlessly it merges with the film's sound design. The music isn't simply laid on top of the scenes, it's embedded in them. It pulses underneath conversations, it stretches through courtroom sequences, it flickers around the hum of machinery and the distant rumble of military operations. Sometimes it's hard to tell where the music ends and where the ambient sound begins. This blend makes the world feel unified. Everything in Oppenheimer's life is part of the same spiraling tension, and the music reinforces that beautifully. Even in scenes that seem quiet on the surface, the score remains active. Göransson doesn't let the tension disappear when the action slows down. For example, during personal conversations between Oppenheimer and his wife or his colleagues, the music is still quietly buzzing in the background, like a low, persistent anxiety that never leaves him. It's as if even in his most private moments, the weight of what he is building and what he will become never stops pressing in on him. The music constantly reminds the audience that Oppenheimer is never free from the ticking clock of his own choices. The score's ability to shift moods without ever losing its core identity is one of its greatest strengths. It can soar with grandeur when it needs to, capturing the sheer scale of what Oppenheimer is trying to achieve. There are moments when the music swells and expands, almost trying to touch the edges of the universe that Oppenheimer is trying to unlock. But the grandeur is always laced with danger, always soaked in the threat of destruction. Even when the music seems beautiful, it carries an undertone of dread. In the sequences where Oppenheimer is facing political betrayal and the brutal stripping of his reputation, the score takes on a different role. It no longer chases him, it starts to trap him. The music during these moments is more restrained, but carries an unbearable tension. It's like the music is holding him in place, just as the legal and political machinery of the time is holding him down. The score never gives him an escape, and by extension, it never gives the audience one either. What makes the Oppenheimer soundtrack stand apart is its refusal to be traditionally memorable, in the way some film scores are. It's not filled with heroic fanfares or hummable themes. Instead, it's filled with emotional textures, with sonic patterns that feel like they're stitched into the fabric of Oppenheimer's soul. You don't walk away from this film humming a tune. You walk away hearing echoes, hearing vibrations, hearing the relentless pulse of history. The music lingers not as a melody but as a feeling, a weight you carry long after the film ends. There's also a bold confidence in how the score sometimes competes with the dialogue. In most films, the music steps back during important conversations, but in Oppenheimer, the score often surges beneath arguments and political debates, not in a way that drowns out the words, but in a way that makes the dialogue feel like it's swimming against a current. It's as if the characters are trying to be heard over the roar of something much larger than themselves, a force they cannot stop. The soundtrack of Oppenheimer is, in every sense, an extension of Oppenheimer himself. It's restless, it's brilliant, it's tormented, and it's deeply human. It's a score that captures the unstoppable momentum of a man who raced to unlock the secrets of the universe, and then found himself crushed beneath the weight of his own discovery. Göransson's music doesn't just accompany this journey, it becomes the journey. It speaks when Oppenheimer cannot. It shakes when the world stands still. It holds when everything else falls apart. The score isn't designed to give the audience comfort or resolution. It's designed to haunt, to provoke, and to stay. It's the sound of ambition and the echo of consequence. It's the pulse of a ticking clock that never really stops, even after the film's final frame. Let's dive even deeper into the thematic layers of Oppenheimer, because this is not a film that just scratches the surface of its ideas. It sinks into them, pulls them apart, and dares the audience to follow it down into the most uncomfortable moral spaces. It's not satisfied with simply telling the story of a man who changed the world. It relentlessly asks, what does that actually mean? What does it cost to be the person who shifts the axis of history? What does it cost to know you've handed humanity the power to destroy itself? One of the most haunting threads that the film weaves throughout is the devastating theme of moral disintegration. Oppenheimer doesn't begin the film as a villain or a monster. He begins as a man fascinated by the edges of science, driven by curiosity, and propelled by the sheer thrill of discovery. But the film slowly, methodically shows how those noble beginnings get corroded by the weight of military agendas, political pressure, personal ambition, and the unstoppable momentum of war. The audience is pulled into this unraveling process. It's not a sudden collapse. It's a slow erosion. Oppenheimer is not a man who sets out to bring catastrophe to the world. He's a man who finds himself tangled in a system where saying no is no longer an option. His story becomes a chilling reflection of how even the brightest minds can be dragged into moral compromise when the machine of power begins to move. The film also offers an absolutely brutal examination of patriotism and its many faces. On one level, there's the nationalistic race to beat the Nazis to the bomb, this urgent, desperate need to protect one's country at all costs. But Oppenheimer's patriotism begins to curdle when he realizes that his scientific victory is just another tool in the hands of men who see the bomb not as a last resort, but as a demonstration of dominance. The flag-waving celebration of military success is contrasted against the suffocating guilt that hangs on Oppenheimer's shoulders. The film forces viewers to question whether patriotism can sometimes be the mask worn by reckless ambition. When does loyalty to a country become complicity in its darkest actions? The film doesn't just touch on this, it relentlessly drills into it. The political paranoia in the film is also handled with suffocating intensity. Oppenheimer becomes a victim of the very government he once served. The film portrays the Red Scare era with chilling accuracy, capturing the climate of suspicion where yesterday's heroes could be tomorrow's traitors. Oppenheimer's past associations, his friendships, even his political curiosity, all are weaponized against him. The film makes it disturbingly clear that in the halls of power, gratitude is fleeting, and no one is safe when the winds shift. His downfall is not the result of public outrage or scientific failure. It is the result of backroom betrayals, of quietly shifting alliances, of a system that devours its own creators. It's a sharp, merciless commentary on how political structures protect themselves at the expense of individuals, and how truth is often irrelevant when control is on the line. The theme of manipulation is another fascinating undercurrent in the film. Oppenheimer is used, by generals, by politicians, by fellow scientists. He is positioned as a tool to win the war, then discarded when his conscience no longer aligns with the interests of those in power. The film constantly shows that knowledge, even genius, can be manipulated. Oppenheimer believes he is in control, but the film repeatedly strips that illusion away. The people around him see him not as a person, but as a function, as the man who can deliver the weapon they need, and nothing more. His personal doubts, his philosophical questions, his emotional collapse, they are inconvenient distractions in the eyes of those who simply want results. This exploration of how individuals are used by systems they cannot control gives the story a biting, tragic edge. One of the most disturbing and fascinating thematic explorations in Oppenheimer is the concept of legacy as a living prison. Oppenheimer's name is etched into history, but the film shows that this so-called immortality is not a triumph. It's a burden. He can't escape it. He can't rewrite it. The world will forever associate him with the bomb, no matter what else he may have accomplished or believed. The film asks a brutal question. What happens when your life's defining moment is also your life's greatest horror? Oppenheimer doesn't get to choose how he is remembered. The legacy he built becomes his cage, one that follows him long after the war is over. It's a devastating commentary on how history simplifies complex people into symbols, often stripping them of their humanity in the process. And perhaps one of the most beautifully unsettling things the film does is lean heavily into the idea that some consequences are unknowable in their entirety. Oppenheimer can see the immediate results of his work, the devastation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but he also glimpses the terrifying long game. He understands that the arms race he helped ignite is a beast that will grow beyond anyone's ability to contain. The film powerfully illustrates that some actions cannot be undone, and their consequences will ripple endlessly into the future. Oppenheimer's tragedy is that he knows this. He knows that the world has crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. He knows that he has helped usher in a new era, where the shadow of nuclear annihilation will always hang over humanity. This existential dread seeps into the very fabric of the film, pressing on every scene, every conversation, every silent moment of Oppenheimer staring into the abyss of his own making. There is also an extraordinary exploration of isolation on multiple levels. Not just the isolation of being a misunderstood genius, but the crushing loneliness of being the only one who truly comprehends the magnitude of what's been unleashed. Even when surrounded by admirers, students, friends, and enemies, Oppenheimer is utterly alone with the weight of his knowledge. The film brilliantly shows that this isolation isn't just social, it's existential. He exists in a mental space that no one else can fully enter. His relationships fracture, his closest allies abandon him, and even those who love him cannot fully reach him. His story is drenched in a haunting loneliness that feels inescapable. Finally, the film digs into the concept of responsibility in a way that is both brutal and deeply philosophical. Where does responsibility begin? Where does it end? Is Oppenheimer solely responsible for the bomb? Or are those who used it, those who demanded it, those who celebrated it, equally culpable? The film refuses to offer an easy answer. It wrestles with the blurred lines between scientific discovery and political application, between invention and destruction, between personal achievement and collective consequence. Oppenheimer's guilt is not portrayed as simple or clean. It's messy, layered, and agonizingly human. The power of Oppenheimer is that it does not hand you a neat package of lessons. It hands you a knot and dares you to untangle it. It offers a portrait of a man and a moment in history that are profoundly complicated, and it asks the viewer to sit with that discomfort. It's not a story about right and wrong. It's a story about what happens when those lines dissolve, when ambition collides with horror, and when the weight of changing the world becomes too heavy for one person to bear. Let's go even deeper into the visual effects and CGI of Oppenheimer, because this is where Christopher Nolan's unique approach truly sets the film apart from almost every other major production in modern cinema. This isn't a movie that uses visual effects as flashy decorations or a way to build fantastical worlds. Nolan treats visual effects as an extension of reality, as a way to make the audience feel as if they are standing right next to Oppenheimer when the unimaginable happens. And the power of these effects doesn't come from overwhelming the screen with chaos. It comes from their incredible subtlety, precision, and restraint. What's most fascinating is that the film's visual language is heavily influenced by Nolan's commitment to doing as much as possible in camera. He famously avoids green screens and CGI-heavy sequences when practical solutions can achieve the desired effect. When you watch the atomic bomb detonate in Oppenheimer, you're not looking at a computer-generated explosion built in post-production. You're witnessing an incredibly detailed, meticulously engineered practical effect filmed under real conditions. Nolan and his special effects team worked obsessively to craft miniature sets, use creative pyrotechnics, employ high-speed cameras, and experiment with chemical reactions to capture something that feels massive, terrifying, and overwhelmingly real. This approach makes the visual moment of the Trinity Test not just a spectacle, but an emotionally shattering event. The audience feels the weight, the heat, the silence, and the crushing anticipation in ways that CGI simply can't deliver. But Nolan doesn't stop there. The film uses visual effects in surprisingly quiet, philosophical ways. There are no superheroes flying through the sky, no intergalactic battles, no otherworldly creatures. Instead, the visual effects live in Oppenheimer's mind, in his visions, in his abstract interpretations of the atomic world. Early in the film, when Oppenheimer imagines the invisible universe of atoms and energy, the screen comes alive with particles colliding, waves of light distorting, and intricate patterns forming and dissolving. These moments are not treated like textbook science diagrams. They are emotionally charged visualizations of Oppenheimer's genius and obsession. The effects are hypnotic, almost meditative, pulling us into the core of his thought process and hinting at the enormous power he is beginning to grasp. These are some of the most memorable visual moments in the film, and they never feel artificial. They are beautifully integrated into the story, used not to distract the audience, but to pull them deeper into Oppenheimer's inner world. What's particularly brilliant is that Nolan never lets these effects feel like interruptions. He weaves them into the film's texture so carefully that they become part of the atmosphere. For example, when Oppenheimer starts to experience psychological breakdowns and sensory overloads, when the applause of the crowd melts into deafening, hollow noise, or when the image of scorched skin flashes across his mind, the visual effects slip in almost subconsciously. These moments are brief, fragmented, and disorienting, but that's exactly the point. Nolan isn't trying to dazzle us here. He's trying to make us feel what Oppenheimer is feeling. The visual effects mirror the cracking of his psyche and the weight of his guilt. And then there's the deliberate contrast between the visual realism of the physical world and the surreal visuals of Oppenheimer's mind. The film constantly balances these two planes. In the scenes where the bomb is developed, where political deals are made, and where hearings are conducted, the visual style is stark, crisp, and minimal. But when we step into Oppenheimer's imagination, the film explodes with visual metaphors, waves of fire, the disintegration of the universe, the terrifying silence after an explosion. The effects here are not cartoonish, they are poetic, like living nightmares. The transition between these grounded and abstract worlds is handled so delicately that the audience barely notices when they've crossed the threshold from reality to Oppenheimer's perception. It's seamless, and that's what makes it so powerful. The film's use of visual effects also helps to enhance the overall atmosphere. The tension leading up to the Trinity Test is so meticulously built that when the explosion finally happens, it's not just a visual moment, it's an emotional earthquake. The effects here are stretched out, allowing the audience to sit in the terror and awe of what they're witnessing. The fireball blooms slowly, the shockwave rolls across the landscape, the silence hangs for an impossibly long beat before sound finally arrives like a physical punch. This manipulation of time, space, and sensory impact is crafted with both practical effects and perfectly timed visual augmentation, and the result is unforgettable. Nolan's choice to limit the use of CGI also enhances the authenticity of the period setting. When we see the Los Alamos facility, the desert landscapes, the lecture halls, and the bustling 1940s streets, these environments feel real because they are real. Where digital touch-ups are used, they are done invisibly, enhancing background details, extending sets, or subtly aging locations. There's no moment where the digital work draws attention to itself, and that's what makes the film's world feel so immersive. The CGI is a quiet partner in service of the story, not a loud centerpiece vying for the audience's attention. Perhaps what stands out most is how Oppenheimer uses visual effects to explore ideas rather than just depict events. When Oppenheimer envisions the potential global chain reaction, the moment when the entire atmosphere could ignite, the film doesn't show us a massive planet-destroying sequence. Instead, it gives us unsettling fragments, atomic waves spreading fire, the cold terror in Oppenheimer's eyes. The visual effects here are conceptual, philosophical. They make us imagine the horror rather than show it directly, which paradoxically makes it even more terrifying. There's also the incredibly effective use of silence in combination with the visual effects. When the bomb detonates, Nolan strips away the sound for several seconds, forcing the audience to absorb the visuals in brutal isolation. This silence is not just an artistic flourish. It's a calculated decision to make the visual impact more jarring, more unforgettable. The silence isn't a break, it's a scream that hasn't arrived yet. And when the sound finally crashes in, the synchronization with the visuals delivers a gut-wrenching punch. Ultimately, what Nolan and his team achieve with the visual effects in Oppenheimer is a perfect harmony between art and science, between spectacle and story. The effects don't exist to dazzle on their own. They exist to serve Oppenheimer's journey, to bring his visions to life, to immerse the audience in his triumphs and his horrors. They are masterfully integrated, endlessly thoughtful, and they create a visual experience that is as emotionally powerful as it is technically impressive. This is not the typical blockbuster visual effects showcase. This is something rarer, a visual effects experience that feels personal, precise, and profoundly human. Let's dive even deeper into the incredible world building and set design of Oppenheimer, because it's not just about where the story takes place. It's about how these spaces quietly shape the characters, influence the mood, and visually narrate the emotional weight of the film. The set design in Oppenheimer is so immersive, so meticulously crafted, that you don't feel like you're watching a historical film. You feel like you've stepped into that turbulent moment in time, as if you're walking the same dusty roads, sitting in the same suffocating hearing rooms, and pacing the same laboratories where world-changing decisions were made. One of the most extraordinary achievements is how Nolan's team reconstructed Los Alamos, which is far more than just a physical location in the film. It's a place built in secrecy, designed to house the brightest scientific minds while isolating them from the rest of the world. The film captures this duality perfectly. On one hand, it's a town, a place where people live, where families go about their day, where children play and neighbors gather. On the other hand, it's a fortress fenced off, patrolled, monitored. This is a world built on control, but also on the edge of chaos. The houses are simple, almost utilitarian, but every detail, the cracked pavements, the dust-covered windows, the hurriedly built structures, conveys that this was a town constructed with urgency, not comfort in mind. It was designed to serve a purpose, the completion of the bomb. The military testing grounds, especially the Trinity site, are visual masterpieces of desolation and dread. The way the camera lingers over the barren desert, the skeletal metal towers, and the isolated bunkers speaks volumes without needing any dialogue. The landscape is stripped bare, leaving nothing to distract from the gravity of what is about to happen there. It's a place where the future of the world is about to change, and yet it's eerily quiet, almost indifferent to the monumental events unfolding upon it. The choice to film in a real desert rather than creating artificial backdrops intensifies this effect, allowing natural light, endless horizons, and harsh winds to become part of the story's texture. The interior sets are equally rich with storytelling. Take the laboratories, for example. They are chaotic, filled with cluttered desks, stacks of notes, chalkboards crowded with complex equations, and mechanical devices scattered around as if scientists have been working nonstop, barely pausing to eat or rest. This disorder is not accidental. It visually communicates the frantic pace at which these scientists were racing against time. The audience feels like they're right there in the lab, surrounded by the hum of equipment and the tension of potential disaster. The labs are cramped, not grand, which enhances the claustrophobia and pressure that the characters are under. And then there's the contrast with the hearing rooms and government offices. These spaces are cold, sterile, and almost lifeless compared to the vibrant chaos of the labs. The hearing room where Oppenheimer faces the brutal political inquisition is stripped of warmth. It's a place of judgment, not discovery. The plain walls, the simple furniture, the echo of footsteps. All these design choices amplify the sense that Oppenheimer is now trapped in a system that seeks to dismantle him. The architecture becomes a cage, a visual representation of his isolation and downfall. Even the lighting in these rooms is harsh and unforgiving, exposing every crack in his story and every shadow of doubt. The transition between different locations is also brilliant. The set design effortlessly guides the audience through Oppenheimer's journey, from the lively, sun-soaked campuses of his early academic days, to the gray, rigid world of military politics, to the arid, apocalyptic desert of the Trinity Test. Each space marks a different chapter in his life, and the locations change tone with him. The wide, open skies of his youth are gradually replaced with confined rooms, suffocating bureaucratic halls, and finally, with the haunting, empty expanses that seem to swallow him whole. The attention to small props and details cannot be overstated. Whether it's the chalk Oppenheimer nervously taps, the vintage security passes clipped to scientists' jackets, the worn-out notebooks, or the period-specific radios crackling with urgent broadcasts. Every item feels perfectly placed, as though it genuinely belongs in that world. The military trucks, the scientist uniforms, the weapon crates, even the wallpaper patterns inside the homes. All of these choices work quietly in the background to build a living, breathing world. Even the architecture serves the story's deeper themes. The flat, repetitive structures of Los Alamos subtly convey the idea of uniformity and compliance, as if the people living there are part of a larger, faceless machine. Meanwhile, the sprawling, intricate European lecture halls Oppenheimer once walked through seem distant, almost like memories of a freer, more idealistic time in his life. This visual progression mirrors his transformation. From a curious young academic fascinated by the mysteries of the universe to a man consumed by political games and moral compromise. The film's courtroom-style hearing settings are another stroke of genius. They could have been designed as grand, imposing chambers, but Nolan opts for something more intimate and unnerving. Rooms that feel just a little too small, with tight seating and the looming presence of military officers and interrogators. These spaces feel like pressure cookers, visually expressing the psychological torment Oppenheimer experiences as his reputation and contributions are dissected and questioned. The dynamic use of both indoor and outdoor spaces is also crucial. The open-air desert scenes give the film breathing room and scale, while the interior rooms close in on the characters, making the more personal moments feel intense and almost suffocating. The contrast between these spaces enhances the emotional rhythm of the film, pulling the audience in and out of Oppenheimer's expanding and collapsing world. The locations also carry a symbolic weight. The desert is not just a testing site, it's a place of transformation, almost biblical in its silence and scope. The lecture halls are not just classrooms. They represent the birth of ideas and the starting point of Oppenheimer's journey. The courtroom isn't just a government building. It's where history rewrites the legacy of the man who built the bomb. Each space is carefully chosen to echo the film's larger themes of creation, destruction, guilt, and legacy. In the end, the set design and location choices in Oppenheimer are never flashy, but they are profoundly effective. They create a world that feels textured, lived in, and deeply connected to the story's emotional core. Every desk, every corridor, every grain of desert sand seems to carry the weight of history. These environments don't just support the characters, they actively participate in their rise and fall. Through its immersive production design, the film builds not just a historical setting, but a fully realized psychological landscape where the walls remember, the skies witness, and the ground trembles under the weight of decisions that would change the world forever. Let's dive even deeper into the dialogue and script of Oppenheimer, because the writing is the engine that drives every moral question, every personal collapse, and every pulse of tension in the film. Christopher Nolan's screenplay is a towering achievement in how it uses language, not just as a way to move the story along, but as a precision instrument that carves into the very soul of the characters. This isn't a film where the dialogue is simply there to sound smart. It's a film where every sentence, pause, stutter, and silence becomes a battlefield. One of the most thrilling things about the script is how the dialogue dances between intellectual brilliance and human frailty. Nolan doesn't write scientists as cold, emotionless calculators. He writes them as people brimming with ego, insecurity, obsession, and ambition. The way they speak is often hurried, sharp-edged, overlapping. There's an urgency in their words because they know they are chasing something history will remember. The dialogue in the laboratories is fast, clipped, and full of shorthand between geniuses, but it never feels like it's just showing off knowledge. It feels like the characters are running out of time, desperate to understand, desperate to be the one who solves the next problem, desperate to change the world before someone else does. This tension gives even the smallest exchanges weight. What's truly fascinating is that Nolan never lets the dialogue flatten into simple exposition. The film is filled with complicated science and intense historical events, yet the script rarely feels like it's pausing to explain things to the audience. Instead, Nolan uses context, subtext, and emotion to guide us through. You might not catch every scientific term being tossed around, but you absolutely understand what's at stake because the dialogue is soaked in competition, fear, and sometimes awe. It's a high-wire act, delivering a story that's both intellectually challenging and emotionally gripping, and Nolan's writing walks that wire with unshakable balance. But the true genius lies in how Nolan uses dialogue to unravel Oppenheimer himself. Oppenheimer's words are slippery, fragmented, sometimes evasive, sometimes brutally direct. He is a man who can deliver speeches that shake entire governments, but who can't seem to fully connect with the people closest to him. His dialogue is layered with contradiction. When he speaks in public, his words are powerful, magnetic, even prophetic. But in private, with his wife Kitty or with Jean Tatlock, his words are guarded, stumbling, sometimes painfully insufficient. The gap between his public language and his private silence is where the film finds its deepest tragedy. The moments of silence in the script are just as critical as the spoken words. Nolan writes pauses that ache with unsaid things. Sometimes Oppenheimer's failure to respond says more than a monologue ever could. In scenes of interrogation, the way he stares blankly, the moments where his breathing quickens but his mouth stays closed. These silences become deafening. The script gives space for the characters to stew in their own guilt, doubt, or fury. This is especially powerful during the security hearings, where Oppenheimer's pauses under cross-examination feel like the crumbling of his entire identity. The structure of the dialogue is another remarkable element. Nolan often writes scenes where multiple timelines bleed into each other. The older Oppenheimer, sitting in hearings, answers questions that spark memories decades earlier, and the dialogue seamlessly shifts between past and present. This nonlinear structure doesn't feel like a gimmick. It feels like memory itself, fragmented and unreliable, as if Oppenheimer's mind is chasing and colliding with different moments all at once. The writing respects the intelligence of the audience, trusting that we can track this kaleidoscope of time through the rhythm of speech, the tone of voice, and the emotional residue each line carries. The supporting characters are also written with incredible precision. General Groves is given some of the sharpest, most no-nonsense lines. His dialogue cuts through the philosophical haze with pure military pragmatism. His bluntness contrasts beautifully with Oppenheimer's more introspective, sometimes evasive style of speaking. Groves' lines keep the story grounded, reminding the audience that, regardless of the moral debates, there is always someone focused on deadlines, logistics, and war strategy. The political players in the film speak with venom-laced politeness. Their words are carefully chosen, their accusations often buried under layers of bureaucratic language. This is especially true in the hearing sequences, where the dialogue becomes a chess game. Every question is a trap, every answer is a potential downfall. The way Nolan writes these exchanges keeps the audience on edge, because the slightest misstep in phrasing can lead to catastrophic consequences for Oppenheimer. The film's intimate scenes carry their own emotional rhythm. Oppenheimer's relationship with Jean Tatlock is charged with vulnerability, yet the dialogue between them is often hesitant and fractured. He never fully opens himself to her, even when their physical connection is intense. Jean's words are bold and emotionally raw, while Oppenheimer's are half-measured, his mind seemingly always elsewhere, caught between his scientific pursuits and his internal guilt. Their conversations crackle with what is said and what remains unsaid, creating a tension that lingers long after their scenes end. With Kitty Oppenheimer, the dialogue turns sharp, confrontational, and biting. Kitty does not allow her husband to retreat into silence. Her lines often carry the bitterness of someone who understands the cost of standing beside a man consumed by his own legend. Their arguments are some of the most human moments in the film, filled with frustration, emotional violence, and the occasional flicker of tenderness that seems to surprise even them. Nolan writes these scenes without smoothing out the rough edges. The words cut. They bruise. But they also reveal the jagged closeness of two people who can't fully walk away from each other. The sparring intellectual debates between the scientists are electric. Whether it's Oppenheimer challenging his colleagues, debating the Soviet threat, or wrestling with the ethics of continuing the Manhattan Project, the dialogue captures the thrill of competing ideas clashing in real time. These moments feel like battlegrounds of ideology, where every line is a weapon and every retort is a shield. The film doesn't give easy answers. Nolan's script deliberately leaves questions dangling in the air, challenging the audience to wrestle with them long after the credits roll. Even Nolan's signature use of recurring lines gives the dialogue a haunting echo. The phrase, "Now I am become death," is the most obvious example, but other lines, snippets of conversations, quiet admissions, and cutting remarks, reappear like ghosts, weaving through Oppenheimer's memories and reframing their meaning as the story unfolds. The script uses repetition not as a crutch, but as a way to deepen the emotional impact, as if Oppenheimer himself cannot escape the weight of his own words. In short, Nolan's script is not just a vehicle for the plot. It's a living, breathing organism that drives the emotional, intellectual, and ethical machinery of the entire film. It's a script where words burn, where silence crushes. Let's go even deeper into how Oppenheimer brilliantly bends, stretches, and redefines genre expectations in a way that makes it not just a great film, but a genre study all by itself. Typically, when we talk about genre execution, we ask, did the film do justice to its expected category? Did a romance feel romantic? Did a thriller feel thrilling? But Oppenheimer doesn't just tick those boxes. It almost tears them up and builds its own hybrid space. At first glance, Oppenheimer seems like it should be a classic biographical drama, the kind we've seen many times before. Normally, these films follow a formula. Introduce the subject's humble beginnings, chart their rise, add some personal struggles, and then end on a high note or a lesson learned. But Nolan instantly signals that this is not that kind of film. He plays with the timeline like it's clay, molding it, breaking it, flipping it. Scenes from Oppenheimer's early life, his scientific discoveries, the creation of the bomb, and his political downfall are all woven together in a nonlinear dance that defies the usual cradle-to-grave structure. This isn't a story that walks in a straight line. It circles itself, it jumps across years without warning, it throws the audience into the middle of events and then rewinds to show how we got there. That fractured narrative immediately distances Oppenheimer from the traditional biopic genre. It's more like Nolan took a historical puzzle, tossed all the pieces in the air, and let us watch as they slowly fall into place. When it comes to genre blending, the film is a masterclass. It uses elements of political thrillers to drive the second half. The security hearings are not just there to fill in historical detail, they are shot and paced like tense espionage interrogations. There are power games happening in every glance, betrayals bubbling beneath every polite exchange, and reputations being destroyed with just a few well-placed words. Nolan crafts these scenes with the tension you'd expect in a Cold War spy film. It's political chess, with the stakes set not just at personal disgrace, but at the rewriting of history itself. These courtroom sequences break free from the dry, procedural traps that many political films fall into. Instead, they crackle with energy and suspense, and the characters aren't simply defending themselves. They're fighting for the truth against a system that's trying to erase them. Another genre Nolan plays with is psychological thriller. We usually associate that with murder mysteries or cat-and-mouse chases, but here the enemy is internal. The most gripping battles in Oppenheimer are fought inside Oppenheimer's own mind. The overwhelming guilt, the flashes of visions, the sound of roaring silence. These are Nolan's psychological weapons. The film dives so deeply into Oppenheimer's paranoia, his emotional collapse, and his haunted psyche that it often feels like a character study wrapped in a thriller's skin. You can feel the weight of his decisions pressing down on him scene after scene. And Nolan visualizes this not just through Cillian Murphy's intense performance, but through surreal, almost nightmarish imagery that makes you question whether you're watching history or stepping into Oppenheimer's fractured perception of it. Then there's the science genre. Most films that deal with scientists show long montages of calculations, lab work, and problem-solving in a way that romanticizes discovery. But Oppenheimer treats science with a dangerous edge. The lab scenes don't feel like a celebration, they feel like countdowns. The work is not shown as a noble quest, but as an unstoppable chain reaction that nobody can turn off. It's like the scientific process itself is another ticking bomb. This approach completely subverts the usual science is a triumph storyline. In Oppenheimer, science is a curse. It's something that unlocks doors the characters aren't ready to walk through. Even the way the Trinity Test is filmed feels like Nolan is staging not a victory, but a horror reveal. The audience isn't clapping when the bomb works. We're holding our breath, terrified of what it means. Nolan even plays with elements of horror. There are moments where Oppenheimer's visions, the way the world seems to pulse around him, the way his guilt physically shakes him, feel like pure psychological horror. The terror isn't in ghosts or monsters, it's in the consequences of knowledge, the weight of history, and the inescapable future that has already been set in motion. When Oppenheimer visualizes the end of the world, it feels like a jump scare without the scream. A silent, creeping dread that wraps itself around the film's heart. Even when you think about war films, Nolan flips expectations. There are no battlefield sequences, no marching soldiers, no combat in the traditional sense. And yet, the tension in Oppenheimer is more suffocating than in many action-heavy war dramas. The war in this film is intellectual, moral, and political. Nolan crafts it so that the race to build the bomb feels like a suspenseful race against time, but instead of bullets flying, It's ethics and equations that are colliding at full speed. Let's not forget how Oppenheimer boldly rejects genre clichés. In many films, we'd expect redemption arcs, moments of heroic victory, maybe even a neat historical wrap-up that tells the audience exactly how to feel. But Nolan doesn't offer those comforts. There's no sweeping music signaling a win, no final speech that forgives or condemns the protagonist entirely. Oppenheimer's story ends in ambiguity, in philosophical terror, in a moment of quiet devastation that leaves the audience with unanswered questions. That's a radical choice in a genre that usually tries to leave the audience with some moral clarity. And Nolan does all this while keeping the film almost completely humorless. Normally, films like this would sprinkle in some levity to make the heavy material easier to digest. Nolan instead chooses to keep the tone tense, serious, and relentless. The rare moments of humor are cold and uncomfortable, usually laced with irony or bitterness. This tonal choice enhances the psychological and moral weight of the story. There are no breaks from the tension, no cinematic breathing room. Nolan is daring the audience to sit with the discomfort and not look away. When you step back, Oppenheimer doesn't just succeed in its genres, it smashes them together, rearranges their pieces, and builds something that feels sharp, dangerous, and entirely unique. It plays like a history lesson wrapped in a political thriller, filtered through the lens of a psychological horror, and structured with the complexity of a puzzle. It's not bound by a single genre. It's a reshaping of what genre can do when a filmmaker like Nolan is at the helm. Let's take an even deeper dive into the social and cultural commentary of Oppenheimer, because this film is like peeling an onion. The more layers you pull back, the more you realize how much Nolan has woven into the fabric of the story without ever needing to preach. The cultural discussions in this film aren't just side notes. They pulse at the center of every frame, quietly shaping how we understand the characters, the politics, and the very machinery of history itself. One of the most fascinating aspects is how the film becomes a critique of hero-making culture. Society loves to put people on pedestals, to elevate geniuses and visionaries as if they're infallible icons, but Oppenheimer flips this idea on its head. It shows us how quickly the same society that crowns someone as a hero can tear them down when they no longer fit the narrative. Oppenheimer goes from being celebrated as the father of the atomic bomb, to being cast out, publicly humiliated, and stripped of his influence. It's a brutal reminder of how heroism is often conditional, shaped by politics, public mood, and power struggles. This isn't just Oppenheimer's story. It mirrors countless real-world figures who've been glorified one day and vilified the next. Nolan exposes this toxic cycle and invites viewers to question whether our obsession with finding heroes does more harm than good. Then there's the film's subtle dissection of American bureaucracy and institutional control. The security hearings, portrayed with almost claustrophobic tension, are not just legal procedures, they are symbolic cages. The same government that empowered Oppenheimer to build the most dangerous weapon in history later uses bureaucratic tools to silence and control him. Nolan shines a light on the cold, relentless machinery of institutions that crush individuals once they outlive their usefulness. Oppenheimer's downfall is not because he's a criminal, it's because he becomes politically inconvenient. Through this, the film speaks volumes about how systems of power maintain dominance by discarding the very people who helped build them. There's also a deeply rooted commentary on intellectual freedom and the cost of speaking out. Oppenheimer, who starts as a man of vision and curiosity, gradually finds himself trapped in a system where independent thought becomes dangerous. His later opposition to the hydrogen bomb, his concerns about arms control, and his ties to leftist intellectual circles make him a target. The film carefully shows how the lines between patriotism and dissent blur in a culture dominated by fear and political paranoia. The McCarthy era witch hunts may seem distant in time, but the film draws a direct connection to modern moments where whistleblowers, critics, and even artists find themselves under attack for challenging the status quo. A powerful, often overlooked layer is the psychological commentary on guilt and the human need for atonement. Oppenheimer's torment doesn't just come from the bomb's devastation. It comes from the unbearable question, did he do the right thing? Nolan doesn't hand us a neat answer, because there isn't one. The film shows how Oppenheimer is trapped between scientific achievement and moral catastrophe. His inner conflict reflects a universal human experience, the moment when ambition collides with conscience. His guilt is personal, but Nolan uses it to explore something much larger: how societies struggle to reconcile progress with its unintended consequences. In many ways, Oppenheimer's suffering becomes a cultural symbol of the collective guilt that still haunts humanity in the nuclear age. The film also places a quiet but potent spotlight on the marginalization of women in historical narratives. Kitty Oppenheimer and Jean Tatlock aren't just side characters. They are women pushed to the emotional fringes while the men around them shape the world's future. Jean's personal struggles and Kitty's frustrations are not accidents. They're reflections of a society that repeatedly sidelines women in both history and power structures. Even when the story focuses on monumental world events, Nolan never lets us forget that emotional labor, mental health, and gendered expectations quietly shape the lives of people behind the headlines. Kitty's battles with alcoholism and Jean's fight with depression are more than subplots. They are social critiques of a system that ignores women's inner lives while glorifying men's public achievements. Another layered commentary is the film's quiet questioning of the moral superiority of nations. The United States is racing to develop the bomb under the premise of self-defense, but once the weapon is built, the decision to use it feels less like a calculated necessity and more like a brutal demonstration of power. Nolan deliberately keeps the focus on the scientists and political rooms rather than showing the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This absence is not accidental. It's a storytelling choice that forces viewers to sit with the weight of what's not shown. It challenges audiences to consider how comfortable we've become with simplified narratives about war and victory. By refusing to show the destruction, Nolan hands that responsibility to us, the viewers, asking us to confront the cost of national ambition and whether any nation can truly claim moral high ground in a race for ultimate weapons. The film also hints at the tragedy of how history repeats itself. Even as Oppenheimer is consumed by guilt and haunted by the implications of nuclear warfare, the arms race continues. The scientists move on. Governments develop even more destructive weapons. The security hearings that destroy Oppenheimer don't end the nuclear age. They simply push it forward under new leadership. This cyclical view of power and progress is chilling because it suggests that the lessons Oppenheimer paid for with his soul were never truly learned by those in charge. Finally, the film carries a sharp commentary on human ambition and the intoxicating pursuit of legacy. Oppenheimer's desire to unlock the secrets of the universe is not inherently evil, but the film shows how easily noble ambition can be hijacked by ego, competition, and the desire to be remembered. This isn't just a story about a bomb. It's a story about how humans crave meaning, achievement, and historical significance, even when the cost is unbearable. Nolan makes this a cultural mirror, asking modern audiences to reflect on how we chase success, innovation, and progress today. Do we pursue these things to improve the world, or simply to leave our names behind? The genius of Nolan's social and cultural commentary in Oppenheimer is that it never feels like a lecture. It's embedded in the dialogue, the silences, the conflicts, and the slow unraveling of Oppenheimer's life. It's as much about the story we watch as it is about the questions we're left to wrestle with long after the credits roll. Let's go even deeper into how Oppenheimer engages its audience on multiple, layered fronts, creating an experience that lingers far beyond the closing credits. This film doesn't simply aim to entertain. It invites audiences into a space where curiosity collides with moral uncertainty, where intellectual stimulation walks hand in hand with emotional upheaval. Nolan crafts a cinematic environment that demands active participation from viewers, making it almost impossible to remain a passive spectator. The emotional engagement begins almost immediately, not through grand spectacle, but through a psychological pull that is impossible to resist. The audience is drawn into Oppenheimer's mind, a brilliant yet conflicted space where genius, ambition, and dread constantly battle for dominance. What makes this connection so potent is that the film refuses to glorify or demonize him in simple terms. Instead, viewers are asked to wrestle with his decisions, to sit with his guilt, to empathize with his triumphs, and to question his motives. This complexity is what keeps the emotional engagement so alive. You don't just witness his story, you feel personally responsible for understanding it. One of the most fascinating ways the film hooks its audience is through its structure. Nolan's signature nonlinear storytelling isn't just a stylistic choice. It's a tool to keep viewers mentally alert. By jumping between timelines, hearings, private conversations, and pivotal events like the Trinity Test, Nolan challenges the audience to piece together the emotional and narrative puzzle. This structure rewards attentive viewers, pulling them into a deeper intellectual engagement as they track shifting allegiances, political undercurrents, and the progression of Oppenheimer's internal collapse. It's like watching a chess match where the stakes are existential, and every move is drenched in tension. And then there are the cinematic moments that hit like emotional lightning bolts. The Trinity Test isn't just a high point because of its technical execution. It's a moment that visibly grips every audience member. The way Nolan builds suspense leading up to the detonation is a masterclass in audience manipulation, playing with silence, breath, and anticipation until the tension is almost unbearable. And when the explosion finally arrives, it's not accompanied by the expected deafening roar but by a void of sound. A creative choice that makes the audience sit in stunned silence, feeling the aftershock in their bones. It's an unforgettable moment that binds the viewer's physical reaction to the narrative in a profound way. Beyond the bomb, audience engagement is constantly stoked by scenes of intimate emotional devastation. The hearings, for example, could have easily been dry procedural sequences, but Nolan frames them like psychological thrillers. The way characters speak, how information is weaponized, how Oppenheimer's allies falter and his enemies close in. All of this is presented in a way that keeps audiences leaning forward, fully invested in every subtle facial expression and unspoken power shift. The relationships in the film also serve as emotional anchors that keep the audience deeply connected. Oppenheimer's complex bond with Jean Tatlock is one such thread that leaves a lasting impact. Their relationship isn't just a subplot. It's a window into his vulnerability, his emotional volatility, and his longing for connection amid a world of cold calculations and political maneuvering. Similarly, his marriage to Kitty is laced with tension, loyalty, resentment, and moments of searing emotional honesty. These personal dynamics allow audiences to see beyond Oppenheimer the historical figure, and into Oppenheimer the flawed, desperate, and isolated man. The film provokes a wide spectrum of emotional responses. There are moments of awe at scientific discovery, moments of dread as political traps tighten, and moments of deep sadness as Oppenheimer's life begins to crumble under the weight of his own legacy. It invites viewers to question themselves. What would I have done? Could I have carried that burden? Would I have made the same choices? This self-reflective engagement makes the film linger in the viewer's mind long after it ends. But perhaps the most powerful form of audience engagement comes from the moral discomfort the film expertly cultivates. Oppenheimer doesn't offer easy answers. It doesn't let audiences walk away with the comfort of a neatly packaged moral lesson. Instead, it forces them to grapple with the uncomfortable coexistence of genius and destruction, of progress and devastation. It challenges viewers to consider the ripple effects of human ambition, the ethical cost of discovery, and the haunting realization that history often remembers people in ways they themselves might have found unbearable. These questions don't fade, they fester, prompting long discussions, heated debates, and for many, a desire to revisit the film in search of further clarity. Even the smallest cinematic details, like recurring visual motifs and shifts in color palettes to signal subjective versus objective truths, become points of intrigue for viewers who love to dissect every frame. Nolan's attention to such layered storytelling elements creates an experience that invites repeat viewing not because the story is confusing, but because it's so rich with emotional, visual, and philosophical depth that one sitting isn't enough to fully absorb it. In every aspect, Oppenheimer keeps its audience tightly gripped, mentally, emotionally, ethically. It offers awe, tragedy, intellectual rigor, and emotional rawness all at once. It's a film that doesn't just ask to be watched. It demands to be wrestled with, unpacked, and discussed, making the audience an active participant in the cinematic experience from beginning to end. Let's go even deeper into how Oppenheimer compares to other films, because this is where the movie truly cements its extraordinary place in cinema. When you think about historical biopics, the usual expectation is to see the chronological story of a great figure's life, complete with personal challenges, professional milestones, and a neat resolution where the legacy is either celebrated or questioned in clear terms. Films like Lincoln, Darkest Hour, or The Theory of Everything are structured this way. They guide the audience through the life of a key historical figure, showing struggles, victories, and often a final moment of closure. Oppenheimer smashes that formula to pieces. It's not interested in closure. It doesn't even try to wrap things up emotionally. Instead, it throws the audience into the storm of moral confusion and leaves them there, without a life raft. The story is told in fragmented timelines that crisscross each other, and this fractured narrative style isn't just a gimmick. It mirrors the fragmented mind of Oppenheimer himself. When you look at Christopher Nolan's own cinematic style, you realize that Oppenheimer is a natural evolution of his obsession with time. In Memento, time was disjointed to mimic memory loss. In Inception, time stretched and folded within dreams. In Dunkirk, time was a weapon to manipulate tension. In Tenet, time literally moved backward. But in Oppenheimer, time is a psychological echo chamber. Past and present collapse into each other, like Oppenheimer himself can't separate what he did from what he's living through. It's Nolan's most mature use of time, less about clever tricks and more about emotional fragmentation. When you compare it to Tenet, which was so preoccupied with making the audience figure out the mechanics of time inversion, Oppenheimer feels like Nolan stepping away from puzzles and stepping fully into emotional territory. It's like he's less interested in whether you solve the movie and more concerned that you feel the full, unbearable weight of the story. Against other films about monumental scientific achievements, Oppenheimer doesn't just distance itself, it outright challenges them. Movies like The Imitation Game or Hidden Figures often focus on the race, the obstacles, the triumph, and the recognition. They are about contributions that, although complex, are broadly seen as victories for humanity. Oppenheimer deliberately strips away the triumphant narrative. The Manhattan Project is treated less like a scientific achievement and more like a moral catastrophe in slow motion. It's not about the thrill of discovery, it's about the dread of consequence. While most science films want to build awe, Oppenheimer builds anxiety. There's no fist-pumping moment of success. There's only a deep, gnawing dread as the bomb drops and history is forever altered. If you compare it to war films, which often showcase bravery, survival, and sacrifice, Oppenheimer offers no such comfort. There are no battlefields in the traditional sense. The war is taking place inside minds, in laboratories, in closed-door hearings. Even Dunkirk, with all its intense realism, offered a narrative of escape and heroism. Oppenheimer is a war film where the enemy is conscience, and the battlefield is internal guilt. Looking at films with heavy courtroom or investigation sequences like JFK, A Few Good Men, or The Post, Oppenheimer does something very different. Those films typically frame their courtroom scenes as climaxes, with clear moral victories or devastating defeats. In Oppenheimer, the hearings and interrogations are used to strip the protagonist's identity, peeling back his sense of self until there's nothing left but doubt and humiliation. The interrogations aren't even about uncovering a larger political truth. They are about tearing Oppenheimer down. It's less about justice and more about power and betrayal. And then there's the question of how Oppenheimer compares to other Nolan character studies like The Prestige. Both films explore the dangerous lengths to which men will go to secure greatness, but The Prestige uses rivalry and obsession as entertainment, while Oppenheimer uses ambition and guilt as a vehicle for existential horror. Nolan's older films often focused on protagonists trying to win in some capacity, whether it's completing a dream mission, solving a crime, or escaping a collapsing timeline. In Oppenheimer, there is no winning. There's only surviving the crushing realization of what one man's ambition has unleashed. Compared to typical Hollywood films about genius, whether it's Good Will Hunting, A Beautiful Mind, or Steve Jobs, Oppenheimer resists giving us that satisfying arc of struggle, acceptance, and eventual personal victory. Those films often present the genius as someone who either comes to terms with their gift or is celebrated for it. Nolan refuses to grant Oppenheimer that peace. There is no warm reconciliation. There is no cathartic moment where the protagonist is embraced by family or colleagues in triumph. There is only isolation, regret, and a final, devastating realization that the greatest achievement may have been the world's greatest curse. Even in comparison to Nolan's previous blockbusters that thrive on spectacle, films like Interstellar or The Dark Knight, Oppenheimer feels stripped down, almost brutal in its refusal to entertain in the traditional sense. There are no chase scenes, no grand rescues, no soaring heroic scores. The spectacle here is not visual, it's psychological. The climax is not a mission completed. It's a man fully consumed by the weight of his choices. So when you stack Oppenheimer next to films within its genre, within Nolan's body of work, and within the broader Hollywood system, it's clear that this film doesn't just stand apart. It actively challenges the audience to rethink what a historical film can be. It refuses comfort. It rejects convention. It doesn't ask you to cheer for the protagonist. It dares you to understand him, and then sit uncomfortably with the consequences. In the landscape of cinema, Oppenheimer is less of a competitor and more of a disruptor, leaving its mark in a way that will force comparisons for years to come. But rarely will it be equaled in the depth of its introspection and the boldness of its approach. The symbolism and metaphors in Oppenheimer are not just scattered decorative elements. They are the beating heart of the film, quietly working underneath every scene, every interaction, every scientific breakthrough, and every moral collapse. When you start peeling back the layers, it becomes clear that Christopher Nolan isn't simply telling the story of a man who built a bomb. He's using visual, narrative, and psychological metaphors to tell the story of a man who built a prison for his own soul. Let's start with one of the most powerful visual metaphors that quietly recurs throughout the film: the constant flickering of light. Whether it's a spark from a cigarette, the shimmering glare of laboratory equipment, the pulsing flashes in Oppenheimer's visions, or the explosive brilliance of the Trinity Test, light in this film is more than illumination. It is the symbol of knowledge, discovery, temptation, and ultimately destruction. It's as if Oppenheimer is a modern-day Prometheus, stealing fire from the gods, but instead of fire he steals atomic light. Every flicker of light is a whisper, reminding us that what once appeared as enlightenment eventually consumes him, and everything he cares about. The film also leans heavily into the metaphor of fragmentation. The way Nolan structures the film, with nonlinear timelines, shattered sequences, and abrupt cuts, mirrors the fragmentation of Oppenheimer's identity. He is not presented as a whole, solid figure. Instead, we see fractured pieces: the passionate scientist, the tortured moralist, the accused communist, the husband, the leader, the traitor, the hero, the destroyer. The very style of the film mimics the splintering of an atom, a perfect metaphor for how Oppenheimer's life and psyche are torn apart by his own actions. The editing becomes a visual language for his mental collapse. Each memory, each flashback, each courtroom scene is a shard, a broken piece that never quite fits perfectly with the others. Then there's the recurring visual of endless horizons, wide, open landscapes where the sky seems to go on forever. These are more than just beautiful shots. They represent the boundlessness of scientific potential and ambition, but they also contrast with the claustrophobic interiors of the interrogation rooms, symbolizing how Oppenheimer's world shrinks as his power grows. The more he unlocks the universe's secrets, the more trapped he becomes by politics, by guilt, by the weight of his legacy. The open skies that once inspired him become a mocking backdrop to his confinement. The recurring use of sound, or the sudden absence of it, is another symbolic powerhouse in this film. Silence in Oppenheimer isn't simply a stylistic choice. It's a metaphor for shock, for isolation, for the void left behind by irreversible decisions. When the Trinity Test explodes in a deafening silence, Nolan is stripping away the comfort of cinematic sound to plunge the audience into the raw, unfiltered weight of witnessing history's most terrifying moment. The delayed sound that follows becomes a brutal reminder that consequences sometimes take time to arrive, but when they do, they are unavoidable and shattering. The courtroom scenes themselves are dripping with symbolism. The narrow, suffocating spaces filled with men in suits represent more than a government inquiry. They are a metaphor for society's tendency to devour its own heroes once their usefulness has expired. Oppenheimer's scientific brilliance becomes irrelevant in these rooms. What matters is politics, paranoia, and power. The image of Oppenheimer, once the architect of the atomic bomb, now cornered and interrogated, is symbolic of the cannibalistic nature of political machines that celebrate innovation one moment and punish it the next. Even Oppenheimer's personal relationships are heavy with symbolic weight. His relationship with Jean Tatlock is not just a subplot. It's a metaphor for temptation, for the dangerous allure of ideology and desire. Jean represents the part of Oppenheimer that longs to rebel, to connect with ideas outside the establishment, to indulge his more vulnerable self. When she dies, it isn't just the loss of a lover, it's the symbolic severing of Oppenheimer's connection to his more radical, human side. After her, he becomes colder, more politically cautious, more vulnerable to manipulation. The interactions between Oppenheimer and Louis Strauss carry their own metaphoric layer. Strauss is not simply a political adversary. He symbolizes the crushing weight of ego, envy, and institutional vengeance. Their conflict represents more than just a personal rivalry. It's a metaphor for the collision between revolutionary science and the bureaucratic machinery that seeks to control, contain, and eventually destroy those who dare to think beyond the system. The ultimate symbol that shadows the entire film is the atomic bomb itself. It's not just a weapon in Oppenheimer. It's a living, breathing metaphor for knowledge that surpasses morality. It embodies the paradox of human achievement. The ability to create something so magnificent and so monstrous at the same time. The bomb is Oppenheimer's child, his masterpiece, his curse. It's a symbol of the double-edged sword of progress. It's a mirror held up to humanity's darkest ambitions. Even the ending of the film echoes this heavy symbolism. When Oppenheimer visualizes a chain reaction that could potentially destroy the entire world, it is not just a scientific hypothesis. It is a metaphor for the uncontrollable spread of consequences. It is the realization that once something is unleashed, whether it's an atomic bomb, an idea, or a lie, it can never be fully contained again. The ripples spread, the chain reaction continues, and Oppenheimer is left to watch as the echoes of his choices shape the future in ways he can no longer influence. Nolan crafts Oppenheimer as a film where every corner, every frame, every silence, every ripple, and every explosion is soaked in metaphor. It's not just a biopic. It's a visual and thematic labyrinth that invites viewers to look deeper, to question the cost of ambition, and to confront the terrifying beauty of what it means to change the world forever. Let's go even deeper into the historical weight, cultural texture, and long-term relevance of Oppenheimer, because this is not just a biopic. It's a cinematic time machine that immerses the audience in one of the most pivotal, morally complex moments in modern history. The film doesn't settle for a surface-level retelling of events. It relentlessly pulls the viewer into the pulse of an era when science, politics, and philosophy collided in ways the world had never seen before. The story of J. Robert Oppenheimer is not a neatly packaged historical anecdote. It's a sprawling saga that unfolds across decades, and the film respects this by not rushing to its big moments. Nolan meticulously reconstructs the socio-political environment that shaped Oppenheimer, from his academic days rubbing shoulders with some of the greatest scientific minds in Europe, to his reluctant rise as the father of the atomic bomb. The film does not romanticize the times. Instead, it carefully embeds the audience in the intricate web of pre-war academia, World War II urgency, and post-war paranoia that defined the period. One of the film's most impressive historical achievements is how it captures the ideological whirlwind that surrounded Oppenheimer and his colleagues. These were not just scientists in lab coats. They were political thinkers, philosophers. Some of them flirted with communism, some were deeply patriotic, others were morally torn. And the film doesn't shy away from showing these ideological tensions. Oppenheimer's association with leftist circles is not simply a plot point. It's a key factor that drives the political narrative later when the U.S. government turns its suspicions toward him during the Red Scare. The film expertly shows how quickly the line between hero and traitor can blur in the eyes of power. In portraying the era, the film dives deep into the intricate power dynamics between the military, the government, and the scientific community. General Leslie Groves is not just there to represent military oversight. He embodies the practical, hard-edged thinking of the U.S. Army and the fierce urgency of wartime leadership. The film uses Groves and Oppenheimer's relationship to illustrate the delicate balance between scientific exploration and military utility. It's a fascinating dynamic. Groves respects Oppenheimer's brilliance but never fully trusts his politics, and Oppenheimer, while leading the project, is never fully comfortable with the military's control. The Trinity Test sequence is a masterclass in historical filmmaking. Nolan doesn't treat it as an overproduced CGI spectacle. It's filmed with grit, tension, and an almost haunting reverence. What's remarkable is that the film doesn't isolate this moment as just a technological success. It shows the human cost behind it. Scientists in the film are excited by the possibilities, but also haunted by the realities. This is where Nolan's historical approach shines. He captures the raw fear and existential weight these men must have felt as they crossed into a new era, where humanity now held the power to annihilate itself. The film's post-Trinity timeline, focusing on Oppenheimer's political unraveling, is not an afterthought. It's arguably the most emotionally gripping section. Oppenheimer's fall from grace, the loyalty hearings, and his battles with Louis Strauss expose the dark underbelly of American post-war politics. Nolan paints this not as isolated courtroom drama, but as a systemic witch hunt that reveals the paranoia of the time. Oppenheimer's public humiliation is portrayed with crushing detail, showing how the very nation that once applauded him was quick to discard him when he no longer fit their political needs. This section of the film hits hard because it's not just about a man's personal downfall. It's a commentary on how quickly societies can turn on their heroes. Nolan doesn't just depict these events as closed historical chapters. The film constantly hints at their long-reaching shadows. The invention of the atomic bomb is not presented as a conclusion. It's treated as the spark of something much larger, something that still looms over humanity. The Cold War arms race, the ethical questions surrounding modern warfare, the lingering fear of nuclear conflict. All of these are left hanging in the air, just as unresolved for the audience as they were for Oppenheimer himself. The film's historical depth also lies in its ability to contrast public perception with private truth. Oppenheimer is lauded in the newspapers but tormented in his own home. He's hailed as a national hero but stripped of his security clearance behind closed doors. Nolan captures these contradictions beautifully, using historical fact not just as a backbone for the story, but as a way to explore timeless human dilemmas about guilt, responsibility, and legacy. What elevates Oppenheimer in its historical context is that it doesn't fall into the trap of great man storytelling. It acknowledges Oppenheimer's genius, but is equally interested in his failures, his blind spots, and the ways he was manipulated by forces larger than himself. It paints a portrait of a man who was brilliant but not infallible, a man who changed the world but never found peace within it. And when compared to other historical films or biopics, Oppenheimer doesn't settle for the simple beats of triumph and tragedy. It complicates those beats. It challenges the viewer to grapple with a history that is still shaping the present. This is not a story that sits comfortably in the past. It's a story that echoes in the geopolitics of today, in the ethical dilemmas of science, and in the ever-present question of whether human beings are ready to wield the power they create. Nolan's treatment of history feels urgent, not nostalgic. The film places us shoulder to shoulder with the people who made decisions that still ripple through our world. And it does so with unflinching honesty. It's not about whether Oppenheimer was a hero or a villain. It's about what it means to live with the consequences of being either. Let's dive even deeper into the fascinating financial and production journey of Oppenheimer, because the way this film balanced its budget, quality, and box office impact is almost as gripping as the story it tells. When Christopher Nolan set out to make Oppenheimer, he wasn't chasing the usual blockbuster formula of high-octane action, superheroes, or CGI spectacles. Instead, he focused on delivering a tense, character-driven historical drama that revolved around scientific discovery, moral conflict, and the weight of personal responsibility. And yet, despite its niche subject matter, this film managed to become one of the biggest box office surprises in recent years. Let's start with the budget. Nolan's Oppenheimer had a production budget of approximately $100 million. For many directors, that might still seem like a dream budget, but when you compare it to Nolan's previous films like Tenet, budgeted around $200 million, or Interstellar, which costs close to $165 million, it becomes clear that Oppenheimer was actually a leaner, more disciplined production. The fascinating part is how Nolan made that $100 million work for him. The film is visually rich, incredibly detailed, and packed with large-scale sequences that look more expensive than they actually were. Nolan made smart, strategic choices, relying heavily on practical effects, location shoots, and minimalist set designs that authentically recreated the World War II and post-war era without ballooning the costs. One of the standout budgetary decisions was Nolan's insistence on shooting the Trinity nuclear test practically rather than using CGI. This is the kind of old-school filmmaking Nolan is known for. He favors real explosions, tangible sets, and on-location filming that can often be more cost-effective and visually convincing than building entire worlds digitally. The practical effects didn't just save money. They added a raw, tactile feeling to the film that resonated deeply with audiences. It gave the movie a grounded authenticity that elevated it far above many modern CGI-heavy films. Now let's look at the box office. When Oppenheimer was announced, there were cautious expectations. A 3-hour, R-rated biopic about a theoretical physicist seemed like it would have a very specific, limited audience. Industry analysts predicted respectable numbers, but nothing close to the nearly $1 billion haul the film eventually achieved. What no one anticipated was the perfect storm created by its release alongside Barbie. This unexpected cultural clash, famously dubbed Barbenheimer, became a global event that drove people to cinemas in unprecedented ways. Audiences were eager to experience both extremes, the bright, satirical world of Barbie and the intense, morally complex universe of Oppenheimer, in a single weekend. It wasn't just about watching the films. It was about being part of a unique cinematic moment. The marketing for Oppenheimer smartly leaned into Christopher Nolan's reputation. The trailers didn't rely on loud action beats or predictable hooks. Instead, they emphasized the film's psychological weight, its historical significance, and the ticking clock tension that builds throughout. They promised an immersive experience, particularly in IMAX, where Nolan's love for large-format filmmaking made the film's visual storytelling truly come alive. This promise paid off, with IMAX and premium format screenings accounting for a significant chunk of the box office revenue. People weren't just buying tickets to a movie, they were buying tickets to a spectacle. The film's sustained performance over many weeks wasn't just a marketing win. It was a reflection of how deeply it connected with audiences. Word of mouth was incredibly strong, and what started as an intellectual, character-driven story became an emotional experience that viewers wanted to recommend to others. The film tapped into universal themes: the burden of genius, the weight of guilt, the complexity of moral decisions, and the inescapable consequences of human ambition. It sparked conversations, debates, and even curiosity about the real history behind the events depicted on screen. Internationally, Oppenheimer performed remarkably well. Nolan's global appeal is undeniable, and this film further cemented his reputation as one of the few directors who can sell tickets worldwide based on his name alone. Countries with a strong appreciation for historical cinema and complex narratives welcomed Oppenheimer enthusiastically, and it became a rare example of a serious drama achieving blockbuster status across continents. Another interesting aspect of Oppenheimer's financial story is how it reshaped conversations around the viability of adult-focused, non-franchise films in theaters. In an industry where superhero sequels and franchise reboots dominate, Oppenheimer stood tall as proof that there is still a massive audience for serious, ambitious storytelling. It gave confidence back to studios that had grown hesitant to fund projects that didn't involve capes or car chases. The film's post-theatrical life has also been significant. It found success in home entertainment, with strong sales in physical media and digital formats. Streaming rights became highly valuable because people wanted to revisit the film, dissect it, and catch all the layers of dialogue, symbolism, and historical nuance they might have missed the first time. The demand for behind-the-scenes content, interviews, and director commentaries surrounding Oppenheimer also indicates just how deeply it penetrated pop culture. In short, the story of Oppenheimer's budget and box office isn't just a tale of dollars and cents. It's a narrative about how bold, intelligent filmmaking can still triumph in the modern age. It's about the power of trusting your audience, delivering complexity without pandering, and proving that cinema, when executed with passion and precision, can still ignite imaginations, break records, and redefine what success looks like for historical dramas. Let's go even deeper into where and how you can experience Oppenheimer in a way that truly honors the scale and craftsmanship of the film. This isn't just any movie. It's the kind of project where the platform you choose genuinely changes the level of impact it has on you. From the very beginning, Christopher Nolan emphasized that Oppenheimer was created as a theatrical first film. It was shot using IMAX 65mm and large-format film cameras to provide breathtaking clarity and depth. The original IMAX 70mm screenings offered an unmatched level of immersion, with a frame so detailed and a screen so overwhelmingly large that audiences could almost feel themselves stepping into the historical moments alongside the characters. Nolan specifically chose these formats to push the limits of visual storytelling, and that's why the first and most recommended way to watch this film is, without question, on an IMAX screen. For those who had that chance, it became less of a movie and more of a visceral, unforgettable experience that engaged the senses completely. But theatrical runs eventually end, and Oppenheimer didn't simply fade away once it left the big screen. It made its way onto digital platforms like Amazon Prime Video, Apple TV, and Google Play, where viewers could either rent or purchase the film. Digital options are convenient, but there's a key difference here. Depending on the platform, video compression can soften the details and flatten the color grading that Nolan and cinematographer Hoyt van Hoytema worked so hard to perfect. That's why serious film enthusiasts often recommend the 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray version of Oppenheimer as the ultimate home viewing option. This version preserves the full scope of the picture and delivers superior sound quality that does justice to Ludwig Göransson's intense, emotionally charged score. If you want to hear the deep rumbles, the ticking clock motifs, and the explosive crescendos in their full glory, the 4K physical release is where the film's sonic weight really hits you. Beyond the main film, the physical release often comes bundled with rich special features that aren't always included in digital rentals or streaming versions. These extras typically include behind-the-scenes footage, making of documentaries, in-depth discussions with Christopher Nolan, and insights into the historical accuracy and scientific research that went into crafting Oppenheimer. For viewers fascinated by the real-life story of J. Robert Oppenheimer and the Manhattan Project, these features add a whole other layer of appreciation. They pull back the curtain on how Nolan balances historical fidelity with narrative drama, how the team replicated Los Alamos, and how they staged the Trinity Test using practical effects instead of CGI. When it comes to streaming, Oppenheimer eventually became available on platforms with high-resolution options. Some services offer it in 4K HDR, which can still provide a strong visual presentation if you have a capable TV and sound system. Watching it this way still demands focus. It's not a film to casually stream in the background. Nolan's storytelling asks for your full attention, for you to sit with the quiet moments, to absorb the weight of ethical dilemmas, and to fully feel the crushing tension that runs throughout the film. What's particularly interesting is how Oppenheimer has continued to generate interest long after its initial release. In some regions, it has returned to theaters for special engagements, anniversary screenings, and Nolan film marathons. This is rare for modern movies and shows just how significant its cinematic impact has been. The film has carved out a lasting place in popular culture, and continues to attract new audiences who want to experience it on the big screen, sometimes even years after its debut. In educational spaces, Oppenheimer is also gaining traction. Universities, film schools, and history departments have screened the film as part of courses and discussions around ethics, science, and the power of cinema in shaping how we remember history. The accessibility of the film across platforms makes it easier for students and educators to engage with it as both art and history. Whether you're watching Oppenheimer in a state-of-the-art cinema, on a home theater setup with a booming sound system, or even on a smaller screen where you carve out a moment of total focus, the film rewards you for giving it your full attention. It's a story that pulls you into its moral complexities, its grand scale, and its moments of intense introspection. And depending on how and where you watch it, your experience can shift dramatically, from awe-inspiring spectacle to intimate character study. That's the magic of Oppenheimer. Its power adapts to the space you bring it into, but it always leaves an impact.